Hello everyone. Thanks for coming along tonight. When I first sort of started the idea of having this room, I wanted it to be a space that people could come together and enjoy electronic music, but music in general, and all talk to each other and be in one room enjoying the music, and kind of already started to work. So I'm glad you all came along tonight. You know Jason from Instruō, I would assume. Looking forward to hearing his music, and then afterwards we're going to do a little Q&A. If you're a bit shy about asking a question, if you want to just tap one of us and let us know what you want to ask, we'll ask the question for you, but please, interrogate him, because he's got a lot to say.
Cheers, Jason. Seems to be working. Let's see what happens.
Fuck, just don't fucking make it, man.
A wee bit of Limmy added in at the back. I'm hoping he sees it and then I can get him into Modular because he makes a bunch of stuff on Ableton. So. Cool. Yeah, that went all right. Cheers. Yeah. Any questions?
Jason, I can see you've got two loopers in there. How do they? You're almost like playing them, like
Yeah.
How are they connecting up? What samples they use, and tell us a bit about how you were playing them there.
Cool. Yeah. Yeah. This system's ridiculous. I'm running double looper, double arbor, double CSL. Only one harmony in this run, but yeah, it's pretty extensive. So let me initialize this because then I can actually like pull up some voices discreetly and sort of talk through the various voices in the patch a bit. So there we go. Here we go. Should talk to the microphone. Can you hear me okay? Yep. Cool. So what we're hearing is basically me cheating. So before I patched the system as it currently is, I spent like a few days just sort of prepping and building various voices, finding the control systems that I wanted for this performance. So this is a patch that is just playback directly from this looper deck here. Kind of on screen. That one. So this is a patch that is 3 1047 filters that I'm just pinging all at once controlled from the harmony. So it's generating this chord voice. And I think it was just I just built a custom chord on the harmony that was just sus2, so I kept it quite tonally ambiguous, so I could just capture that in and play a bit with the different timbres. So I think I had each filter going through a tan H just to sort of add a bit of saturation, and then they were summed at a Karn, which is the more recent Instruō mixer. And I was just playing live with a bunch of different modulation sources. So one was just like, they're all just pulsing and coming and going. There's a bit somewhere where there's a big, like, nice, ring mod sweep because I just like ramped up that bit there. Perfectly timed. So yeah, I kind of like curated that and that kind of set the tone harmonically for where I was going to be working with it. So I just recorded that straight to the looper and then brought that into Ableton so I could tighten up the timing because I'm using the main clock out. So you might be able to see that blinking away on camera. No, it's hidden by the patch cable. So the master clock is just going, so every chord change, it's giving me a clock pulse, and that's what's clocking all the sort of timed rhythmic elements of this patch. So I'll bring up the kick slightly. Slightly. So that's a live triggered 1047 that's generating the kick voice, and it's just hitting every chord change. So what I'll do, I'll turn this down here, then I can actually turn these up reasonably in context. That's more like it. Cool. There's the ring mod suite. So that's the one I was hoping for. Yeah, so like this is pre-recorded compositional chord progression that once I got that in, I pulled that in on the looper, built the kick around it, which is just like hitting on every chord change, and then I started harmonizing with it with the live modular. So I've got this voice here, which is the crewing oscillator. So this is the super saw stereo, nice big spread of it. That's just playing the root note. So this added in a degree of tonality to the whole thing. So I think I ended up on I've got notated here as a B flat major 7 to an A minor 7 between the two. That's just how it's written where it's down here. It turned out when I was recording that entire patch, I tuned it to something in the studio. I had a guitar that was just tuned down a half step. So everything's down a half step, so that threw me off. So my violin's actually tuned down a half step, which took a bit of getting used to, but now that I've practiced the patch a bit, it's a bit more manageable. So there's that croon that's playing the bass voice, that's just sort of thickening out this playback chord progression sample, and then I feel like that's gone a bit out of tune. There we go. So this is the live chordal voice, so I'll isolate that, so let's mute the So this is my go-to harmonic patch voice, where I've got harmony just playing through 2 chords, which is oscillating between major 7th and minor 7th, although I think I'm cutting the 7th, so it's just major minor triads, and that's going into the psi, which is the quad sawtooth oscillator, so it's harmonizing it to this chord progression, but then I've got the ability to manually ride the psi's got built-in interval offset, so it's basically adding diatonic tensions to it. So it adds melodic elements without really having to do anything. I can just like slide between, and it just adds a nice bit of motion to it harmonically. So that on top of this sus2 oscillating playback. Yeah, there's stereo voices in there. A lot of the stuff's mono, but I've got like dynamic panning that's just sort of run from parallel clocks from the whole system. So that was kind of what evolved as the main fundamental element of the voice, of the patch, was this chord progression. So that was kind of the goal, was to land on this as something that I could then, you know, just sit on and it's just one fader that adds the sort of nice melodic tuning to it. So that gave me my B section to the composition, and then I stripped back and feel like I kind of cheated, so I just like pulled the violin in, which I can comfortably improvise in, and that's, you know, running that into the looper and then the arbor. So I'll put this back in looping mode. Here we go. Cool. Okay, so I've got foot controller from the Lyric module, and that's giving me, you know, remote control over this looper, which is, yeah, just on screen. So clear that, so I can just start recording, hit stop, and it's just going to play this as a loop. And I can then have that dubbing over the top. There we go. So there's a bit of a signal chain with the violin getting into the system. It's basically through a couple of pedals just to noise gate it, because my studio is even like picking up all sort of buzz. So that was, I got it as clean as possible. It's running through a Fishman preamp, which gives me a lot more control over the tone of it, because I own a couple of electric violins and I hate the sound of dry electric violins. So this is running through the Fishman pickup to essentially add a spectral image of, you know, the resonance of an acoustic violin to it. So it basically takes the electric, makes it sound more acoustic. Yeah, long way for a shortcut. I should have just used an acoustic violin, but I think first time trying this set, it was in block, so I figured it was going to be way too loud for acoustic pickups and all that jazz. So it's a long way for a shortcut, but it did the job. So that's going into the looper, and let me loop in just a repeating ostinato or just a bass pluck. I could actually play in notes, and I've got this deck set to quantize octaves. So as I play it around, actually I'll record in a new note. There we go. Turn it up a bit. So I can do that. I can then change the octave it's playing back at, but if I run it up to the higher octave, dub in that same note, it's various speed recording, so it's basically recorded that note now on this faster spinning tape. So if I bring it down, I've got the way of adding in, you know, like cello or double bass registers, and same trick going backwards. So if I reverse it, I've got that reverse swell now. So I'm basically playing with that at the start to layer up an overall repeating note. Microphone. then that whole thing's running into the arbor, which lets me live sample into it, and it's just playing back. That's what's doing all the dynamic harmonization. So this is, at the moment, going up and down in octaves, but when I let it build up into a more dissonant chaos, I just change like pitch variation of it, so every grain's playing back at just a random detuning, so it just turns into a clusterfuck of noise, which was a nice way to transition into the the more curated playback. Then comes the screaming, which was kind of an idea from the get-go. I just spent a couple of fun evenings just on YouTube, just searching for film and TV that had the most aggressive argument scenes and stuff, and just like sampled sections of that. So I've got an Ableton session that's just got lots of chopped up screams and shouts, and I'll play back I won't put you through the full like minute and a half of solid screaming, but I think it's one of the best things I've ever produced. Where are we going? Yeah, I cut it down to like about a minute, and then I ended up just sending that like audio clip to a few friends, like just out of context, like, what do you think?
There's an ambient remix coming, isn't it?
Of this, yeah, I'll do my best. Yeah, so timing-wise, like this is edit 2 of the screams, and it just ended up being quite a nice cue. So I let it like ring out. Fuck off! So I just wait for Limmy to shout "fuck off," and then I hit the kick, and then just let it sort of like scramble through. So that's like the live performative element where I've just got it like locked down to short glitchy loop. It's full dynamic vari speed, so I can basically like scrub through it. And it's quite a nice textural bed at times. So yeah, I was combining that with that sort of chaos. So that's just the CSL and a Gnoni. So there's a complex like circular FM with hard sync. So I'm able to like tune that to a static note if I need.
I had a question about later on the kind of percussive elements where you had these like rushes of like kicks and.
Yeah. So
how are you fixing that?
That's a new module that will be coming to stores soon. So yeah, this is a module that I've basically had designed and ready for. I mean, when it was supposed to launch with the Gnoni, I think, like way back in 2021, but COVID came and nicely screwed up everything timing-wise. So I've got 5 of them in this case now. Yeah, it's a pretty useful module. So what I'll do, I'll set this to normal. I'll bring up my kick voice, which is, turn that down a bit. So that kick on its own is a 1047 filter, so just a resonant filter being pinged by a clock. And I've got a pair of knock envelopes that I'm summing together. So I've got one that's a big linear drop that pulls it down, and another one that is the, maybe just see it on screen. Yeah, you can kind of see it blinking. That guy. So I can trigger this either with one-shot button, or I can toggle on and off the clock. So the clock's being derived from ultimately the same clock that's coming from the looper. So I've got that going into another new prototype, which I won't draw too much attention to because it's a bit earlier stage, but it's passing the clock out to other destinations. And then one of these new modules is the one that's driving the kicks. So if I trigger that, I can run it straight, so it's just hitting every single time. When it's playing rapid like this, the longer drop envelope doesn't kick in until it's left alone. there's a magic switch I can hit. Which kicks in a probability engine that I've programmed for this module that every downbeat, every clock, it's going to be pulling a coin toss chance of picking another musical subdivision. So these are going all the way up to 64th notes with triplets in between. There's a single fader, so as that brings up, it's opening up the wider range of available subdivisions and altering the chance that it might hit. So with the fader all the way up, we're getting those like really heavy rolls in there. I'm using that same clock pulse, the oscillating one, to toggle a switch that's switching between. That's the CSL voice. And the screams. So. If I take it back to straight clocks, that's where it locks into like really just slam and kick. But if I bring the probability all the way down, it basically will just play the straight clock with a coin toss chance of missing one, so it kind of just opens things up a bit rhythmically. Then there's also another looper that's just playing back a sample that I can switch to, which is one of the samples from the sample library we've shipped with the looper, with the V2 firmware. So that was, it wasn't Jimmy that played. We've got a few drummers in-house, but I think it was a friend that came in that just, they can play blast beats. So we thought, we'll add that in because someone will find a use for it. And I thought I should probably find a use for it to show blast beats can be musical. Yeah, so hyper-aggression, like, descended from something a bit more nice and tuneful was the overall plan. Yeah, and that's kind of a breakdown of the various voices that are going on in between. Like the way that I've started to approach doing a live set now is building a rig and spending a lot of time like dialing in voices. Like I'll try to have at least like 3 or 4 different voices within the patch that I can access and layer at different times, and then having different variations that I can get them to behave in very different ways. So compositionally, it goes from being like 3 or 4 voices to 8 or 12 even, if I've got like 3 different ways of manipulating one. And kind of the way that I've previously used Modular is just patching something up, running it to a recorder, and then just capturing the whole thing so that after the fact I can then go back and then try and chop up into stems. The downside being that ends up being like hours and hours of audio to then have to cut through, and if I find something that I really like compositionally, it's burned to tape. It's like I could pitch shift it or process it as samples, but I don't have the raw original synthesis of it. So the way I've been trying to work now is experiment with a patch. When it lands on something I like, then deep dive and transcribe it. So I've got a method of scribbling out and transcribing. I put a sheet of paper somewhere. I've basically gone through and transcribed the whole patch, like in like a sort of patch diagram notation. So I go between that and actually writing out a musical score that lets me sort of give me notes to self. So there's some musical cues written in there, there's some harmonic or melodic elements, but then a lot of it is just my own shorthand for this module needs to be changed to this setting. So I've got cues to like change it, and then it's just practicing transitions in the composition. So this piece ended up being ABC, so violin into chordal stuff into the screams. And yeah, I kind of like just tried to give myself extreme contrasts in the sounds and then just try and paint a roadmap and get an elegant way for it to naturally flow, which I'm pretty happy with how it came out. It's yeah, I think a lot of people don't expect the screams in this one, but yeah.
Does anyone else have any questions?
How has a live performance artist influenced your module designs?
I was going to ask the same question.
Yeah, I mean, I've kind of always, the original remit when I started producing modules as Instruō, like the first one being the Troika, I didn't plan to launch that as a module. Like I was sort of, the Instruō brand and name like I came up with, and I played some shows as that, and I used that as a brand for, I've got a couple of EPs that I helped produce, and I'm on there as Instruō. But I thought, I didn't think an analog oscillator was the sensible thing to launch a new company with, because how many analog oscillators are there out there? But because the harmony was originally my plan for, like, that's something that I think's a bit different. That's the harmonic engine I'd sort of been working on for years prior. But it was the guys over in Portland at Moleco and Dark Place that I've been friends with for years. So I put out a video that was documenting the design of the Troika, and they offered to finance it and put it into production, which allowed me to, freed me up to work more passively and in terms of income, so I could develop the next stuff and just built up bit by bit. But from that point, I kind of set the rules that I should design what I'm looking for my system. And I kind of tried to get out of the habit of overthinking and being like, okay, this could technically go all these directions and be able to do this. But I had to draw a line and be like, am I actually ever going to use that or that function? So I've tried to keep things. There's certain modules that have more depth than others, like the Arbor, Looper, they're digital platforms more so. So they've got a lot of, you need the manual. You need there's a bit of menu diving to configure it, especially with the new firmware for the Looper. And the new Arbor is going to be much the same, if not more. So it's there's a level of depth there, but they are kind of different genres of module, I guess. But a lot of the more analog stuff, I try to keep it hands-on. I think it's like modules like the Psy, which is the quad oscillator. It's got a lot of stuff buried in, but I tried to keep it as top-level accessible as I can. And it needs to be a module that I'm interested in performing with for me to, to get to that development stage.
So my question was slightly different. It was more about you performing. Afterwards, do you ever go back and then think, what I really needed to do there was ... and then so the performance kind of implies what you want to do technically, and then that's led to new modules? I
think in the past, I've been performing with a full Instruō system for quite a while now. We're at this stage, definitely, it's very well rounded to the point where we're going to start thinking about what would be a nice subset to curate as a standalone system or collection of systems of pre-curated setups. I think a lot of the early designs were a case of, I'm missing this in my system, so I'm going to design this and add it in. So envelope generators, the Cease was the first envelope that I did, which is a voltage-controlled ADSR, which it's a different sort of tier than a complex oscillator or a complex filter, but they're kind of necessary. So I didn't, I just sort of worked away on various utilities and filled in the gaps as I went, and we just sort of naturally added them to the roster, and it's just growing naturally from there. At this stage, we've got enough that covers a lot of bases. I mean, there's 5 oscillators on the market. Well, Troika's out, Tona's out. We've got CSL, Psych, Yoni. There's about 4 or 5 oscillators. It's quite a lot of oscillators, but I don't think there's any direct overlap in them individually. The Psych and the Kroon are maybe arguably close because they produce super saw-based things, but the Psych is 4 discrete cores crammed into a single module with paraphonic control with a smart VCA, whereas the Kroon is just one voice that you can make. You can tighten it into just like a single layered sawtooth, or you can turn it into a complete swarm, but it's all centered around a single tone that's not got polyphony to it. So even those two, which share most similarity, there's one can do many things that the other can't, and vice versa. So it's just been kind of if a new idea comes about, I'm starting to look a bit more. It's okay, what does that tread on the toes of? Is it worth looking to discontinue certain things and expand the range that way? Most of the time, I just ask Alex, does this make sense as a module? But that when I get to asking you that, it's I've already got a prototype. I've already got all the files ready to go to production if I want. So I'm kind of it exists. What do we do with it? But it's definitely I set my own sort of guidelines for it. It needs to be something that I'm interested in performing with, or it needs to fill a role in how I work with music fundamentally.
So you don't have a sequencer.
But is that...
That's a sequencer.
Well, exactly. But Ableton is a good example. But if you... is that driven out of... Well, you know how to generate the voltages that meet your needs already via other means, versus this is not a thing that when you're performing, when you want to create music, that's not something you naturally tap into.
Yeah, I think I use quantized sample and hold or quantized random voltage and like to curate it so that it's not a rigid melody. Like if you're undersampling a sawtooth and you get like alias tones of what that fundamental sawtooth would be, and it ends up landing in weird musical ostinatos, which if you then quantize that to a harmonic grid, then you've got a sequence that you didn't need to program the sequence in. So I've designed sequencers in the past, like pre-Instruō, and I always felt like I was trying to fit the demand of what a sequencer should do, and I've never really used them, so that's kind of why I've not really gone down that avenue, because I don't know what makes for a good sequencer. Because like there's no, synthesizers in general are such a new instrument, compared to violins, guitars, piano, instruments that have existed for centuries. Like they are tried and tested, but there's not a there's not a right way for a sequencer to have an interface. Like, is it booklet style? Is it a ring? Is it a grid? Is it menu diving? Is it, cherry keys on a keyboard? Is it, like there's not a, it's a very subjective thing, what makes a good sequencer. So we do have a few things in the pipeline that we're experimenting with that I'm going to rely more on some of my collaborators that do use sequencers, because they'll know what makes more sense. And I'll just throw out silly ideas like, well, I would want it to do that. Does that make sense? Even if it doesn't, I'm, saying, no, I want it to do that for me. So, yeah, so I guess it's kind of just how I've developed building patches compositionally and like using random voltage that I've never felt that I've lacked a sequencer, because I can get pattern notes, or I can then quantize it down to what I need. Yeah.
So presumably you can also, with the probability module now, you can plumb that into other modules to get some of what other people might.
Yeah, it also has a lot of modes built in to generate patterns, much in the same way I would use an analog sample and hold. So it's kind of got all that factored in. So it's the way that I would, generate voltages in place of a sequencer. This does it all, plus clock, plus weird rhythmic stuff. So it's it's going to be a fun one.
Nice. The Instruō version of Marbles. Kind of, sort of.
Kinda, yeah. I mean, it generates random voltages and clocks. It's probably not a bad comparison. Mine's smaller though. So. Yeah, you can fit more of them into a single case. Yeah.
All the randomness.
Yeah. Cool. Well, thanks for coming.
One question.
Oh yeah.
Sorry. Are you just using like reverb from like Arbor or something?
Yeah. All the reverb's just from Arbor in this case. The main harmonic bed here. That's probably random voltage. Sometimes it does it, sometimes it doesn't. There's basically random voltages going in that it's going to, like, sometimes it'll be flooded with reverb, sometimes it'll be pulled back, sometimes it'll flip it and give you just the dry reverb and stuff. So it took a lot of fine tuning. So like using the Karn module, which gives a lot of control for like bias offset and processing of voltages to a sweet spot. But yeah, like it's the two arbors I'm using as reverb and like parallel, like granular playback over the stuff coming in. So I'm using the onset detection so that every chord, this is triggering capture. So it's basically every chord, it's playing it dry plus layering in bits of it over the top. Like that. I don't know if that made it into the performance. I just realized that knob was all the way down, so we just had. There we go. I'll just edit it in.
So there's no multi-effects modules on the horizon then?
Reverb would be good.
Reverb would be good. I could use a reverb.
And I'm sure your take on it would be a bit different.
I think it will be different, yeah. It's the damn chip shortage that we're waiting to get through for all that to happen. But yeah, there's lots of things in the pipeline.
Have you found yourself kind of designing more sort of analog-y, like changing your sort of design philosophy, reflecting the sort of chip shortage and the availability of parts?
Yeah, completely. I mean, there were a lot of modules that are now in the near pipeline, so they are now, production stage, getting ready for sharing with the world. But there are a bunch during the whole past 2 or 3 years, the Cure, the Lara, the Knock, the Karn. Other ones were sort of in between. Those are the main 4, because we released 2 at a time each time. So they're all analog, and some of them were whiteboard scribbles of an output module, and it kind of the last the 2 years of COVID, they kind of forced a bit of a change of gears. A lot of modules that were designed queued up, I had to just set aside and we had to just wait until parts came available. So yeah, it was quite fun being able to work in a way that I could change gears. There's a lot of digital modules in development, and that's working with various collaborators and co-developers, and we've basically just used the last few years as a means of R&D and really developing a lot of stuff that's going to make things easier for us to develop digital modules. So learning different programming platforms or frameworks that so far I've stuck largely with Raspberry Pi, Arduino, sort of more readily accessible hacker tools. But I've now got a few developers that I can say, okay, let's just figure out what we would need to really deep dive on a DSP based thing, or something that's multi-core processing that's a bit more tailor fit to a module we might design, as opposed to the Arbor and Looper, which are both running off Raspberry Pi based platforms, which they're really powerful devices, but there's a high price per component for that because it's so much crammed in. So yeah, it's gonna give us a lot more flexibility with new designs as we go. But yeah, I was able to use the last few years to focus in on a bunch of analog stuff while we've got all this R&D going on in the background. So we're now at the point where we're starting to merge things together, and we've got new analog designs that I'm doing that I've got more sophisticated digital elements built in, and I can just scroll through Mouser, see what chips are available from ST, from NXP, from Atmel, and be like, okay, that fits the bill in terms of spec. We now have the means of knowing what frameworks needed to actually start developing for this, and how to port over existing code and libraries that are now developed in-house. So it's been a busy time. But there's I think we've been able to juggle it well and maintain throughput of analog designs that were producible. It's kind of paved the way for a lot of new stuff as well, which is cool.
Just on that note, does that mean that Arbor is going to be Arbor 2.0, or is it going to be a firmware update
like the Looper firmware update? Yeah. It's been in the works the same sort of time as the Looper. We assigned a few extra programmers onto the Looper to help do a lot more of the research, whereas Sebastian, who I co-developed the Arbor with, it's still, we've been basically working as the two of us, building up the new feature set. I say I just throw out silly ideas and it's what about doing this? And quite a lot of them have made it in, so yeah, it's going to be pretty powerful.
So do you think in a way, I guess, the company's progressed so much that you don't often look back? Do you think the chip shortage has kind of helped in that respect, because you're able to kind of go back and say, actually, let's redo the Looper, let's redo the Arbor? It's maybe giving you kind of a point to kind of reflect and kind of really perfect some ideas that you have.
Possibly. I think Arbor and Looper, we always had this as a plan, because they are more of digital platforms as opposed to the CSL. There's a digital component, but it's just controlling switches and routing under the hood for analog signal path. Whereas Looper and Arbor, they're all DSP based. There's unique hardware and analog ins, analog outs, and interface, but it's digital, so it's able to do anything really. So we kind of always knew we had a goal of what we wanted them to do on launch originally, and with the plan to, if these do well, then that's a platform we can further expand on. And as we're learning how to do it better each time, then it's it's going to evolve. So those ones are definitely going to stay for a while. Like we don't need to do a looper V2 because the hardware's, I mean, there's the biggest limit is the hardware actually in terms of interface. Like we've had to put in a bunch of button combinations to do it. So there's a bit of a lookup table in the documentation, but they're capable of so much more than we initially thought of in round one. But yeah, in terms of like looking back and like sort of planning, like the last few years have just been so busy. Like it's just sales just shot through the roof during initial lockdowns. So I was kind of forced to expand and like grow the team so that we had more capability to produce modules to meet demand. Yeah, it's mad. So doing that and then expanding in the premises we're in. So we've kind of just taken over the rest of the building, and yeah, it's I'm really enjoying where we're at because it's a bigger team, but I feel like we've carved out a little niche where everyone's training up on a range of different tasks. So we're able to check in week to week and be like, okay, what modules need produced this week, so we can really like turn on a dime and change focus of what's being built, as opposed to I guess more traditional manufacturing processes where it's outsourced to a factory that will do an entire run of 500, whereas we can there's enough of an investment that I can buy the parts needed for a longer term plan, but we don't need to rush and build them all at once. We can just sort of like build them as needed week to week, month to month, which is keeps things really adaptable.
So does anyone else have any other questions? Is there anything else you'd like to ask Jason?
Should we all scream a bit and get some more sound?
Well, that was brilliant.
Thanks all of you for coming. Just quick reminder, attack release is on at Block, which is a wee bit of a walk, but yeah. Stagger. Or Stagger, yeah. And that starts in about 45 minutes, so plenty of time to sort it. Thanks very much for coming along.